And welcome everyone. As everyone's filing in, we'll go ahead and introduce our speaker today, inshallah. Um, First of all, UCF AMMSA really wants to send a really heartfelt Jazakallah khairan towards all of our speakers lined up for us this month, as well as all of our participants from all across the U.S. We know that this time, especially right before Iftar, is really, really special, and were honored that you're choosing to spend it with such honorable scholars and people of Islam. So I'll go ahead by introducing our scholar today, inshallah. We have Shaykh Dr. Omar Husseini. Um, he's very special to us because he resides in Tampa, and everyone in Tampa, we all know him, and he, mashallah, always supports us in all of our endeavors and things like that. So I'll go ahead and introduce him. So Shaykh Omar Husseini, he memorized the Quran at Ma'had at-Ta'lim al-Islam, and he completed his Shari'ah studies at Darul Ulum Zakaria in South Africa. He holds a BA in psychology, an MD degree, and completed residency and fellowships in pathology at Washington University in St. Louis. He is also the director of molecular hematopathology at Moffitt Cancer Center and an associate professor at USF. Go Bulls, whoever's from USF, while also teaching Arabic, Islamic jurisprudence, and spirituality. So, inshallah, let's begin. And I would encourage everyone to please provide your undivided attention to Sheikh Omar. And again, we thank you so much for joining us. Bismillah.
Sheikh, I believe you're muted. If I'm not so certain.
Yes, you're right. Jazakumullah khair. Thanks
So,
for jumping in there. Jazakallah khair, Safia, for that introduction. And please, just notify me if my voice is not coming through, okay, or if we have any AV difficulties, inshallah. Alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa. I think one of the things that young Muslims growing up in the West really struggle with is trying to find a niche where faith can be relevant to their everyday life, right? Islam is great. It's what we grew up with. Sometimes we came to the faith and had our own faith journeys to come to Islam. But it really begs the question that how does Islam, beyond the rituals, beyond the beliefs, how does it really make my everyday life better? And sometimes, and I would say perhaps sadly, when people ask themselves that question, that is my life better off because of Islam? For some of the people, the answer might be no, quite frankly, because there's so many rules and it's just so hard. And if I didn't have to, follow all these prohibitions, I could network, I could do this, I could do that, I could get ahead in my career, I could get ahead in life. And so Islam is what's that called? Sort of holding me back from my potential. And that would, perhaps be the least of, grievances. And on the other side, just people feeling that it doesn't really relate to real life. When in fact, I don't think the problem here really is Islam. It may just be the Islam that we've been exposed to. You see in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Man amana wa amila a'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, bismillahir rahmanir rahim, that whosoever believes and does good deeds, فَلَنُحْيِيَنَّهُ حَيَاةً طَيِّبَةً. And it's very difficult to translate this into English language because there's some subtle nuances in the Arabic language that don't submit themselves easily to translation, but there's something called lam ta'kid, there's nun thaqila. So it's like someone like really shouting at you, telling you with a lot of emphasis that if you believe and do good deeds, that we will make you live the good life. And the good life is obviously here in the hereafter, but it's also here in this world, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants those people of faith and people of action a good life. And if you don't see that, then the problem is not necessarily in Islam, it's actually in us. It's like the verse in the Quran that inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. Indeed, those who not those who pray, but the prayer itself, it forbids people from indecent acts, obscene acts, and evil deeds. But a lot of people pray, and a lot of people still do a lot of bad things. And so it doesn't mean that the verse is incorrect. The problem is not with the prayer. The problem is with the way that we're praying it. Um, so um, today we have this topic of increasing productivity through the Sunnah, and it's sort of a jab at this, right? It's a stab at trying to see how we can bring um, the teachings that we have in our amazing, beautiful, magnificent faith to come to bear on real life, right? On our everyday life. And how we can, and this is one of the ways how you can live the good life is by actually increasing productivity, because a life full of impotence is no life at all. When a person is able to produce things, do things, affect the world around them, that is one of the pillars, not the only pillar, but it is one of the pillars of what we would term a meaningful life. And a meaningful life is a life well lived. But before we continue, I know I would probably ask this listener to take a step back and perhaps consider, we almost take it for granted that this idea of productivity is a virtue, because productivity is the stepping stone to success, and therefore inherently it must be good, it must be adopted, it must be extolled. And the modern world will tell you so, and partially because we live in uh, the confines of a very capitalistic worldview that emphasizes materialism not as a vice, but actually as a goal. The more we produce, the more technology we have, the more gadgets we have, the more we invent, the more patents we produce, the better off we are as a society and as the human race. Because technically, the more we are doing, the more we are succeeding. And according to this, I think according to this idea or this perspective, you can frame it as like GDP should be correlated with triumph. And I think we really need to challenge this paradigm. And it's not just me, there's many other contemporary thinkers who also challenge this paradigm, where we have to question our assumptions. And for the simple reason that if you really look at life today, particularly in the West, we have more than we have ever had in human history, but never have people been so out of kilter. Um, and I think the fundamental issue here, right, if you do a root cause analysis, is a confusion of ends and means, because productivity was made an end when in fact it was just a mean, right? So you take the nihilist outlook in the 21st century, that productivity is the end all be all. But to us, it's not, right? When we follow the tenets of Islam, yes, what will happen is you will automatically become productive, but it is not an end in and of itself, right? It is to subserve a greater purpose. Now, does the deen even call us to productivity? I mean, I think we can fairly make that argument. If you look in Surah Al-Mulk, right, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. In another verse, سابقوا إلى مغفرة من ربكم وجنة أرضها السماء والأرض. That, سابقوا, that musabaqa, this when you put something on this verb form of fa'ala, it also indicates mutuality in the action. And sabaqa is to outstrip someone else. So outstrip each other, meaning compete with each other in seeking the mercy of your Lord. Or in the first verse I recited, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that the reason for this whole drama, this whole stage being set up, this whole game, life and death, all of it, the whole show, what is it all about? لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. So that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can test And for us, it's a test, but for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's to manifest ayyukum ahsanu amala, which of you are the best in deeds. So if you want to be the best in deeds, and if you want to win a competition, you obviously have to be very productive. And this lam that's being used, liyabluwakum, this lam ta'lil, right? This shows the very reason that everything around us exists is so that we can demonstrate a certain level of productivity, particularly for the akhirah. But then it is still steeped in this idea that we should be productive and productive human beings. So here's the kicker. So Islam is calling towards productivity, right? In modern world also calls towards productivity, but the genius of Islam is that it provides a direction to that productivity, right? So it's not productivity, which is the end in and of itself. Like this is where you're trying to get to. And if you're productive, aha, we succeeded. No, that's actually the bridge that gets you to some higher value, right? And that higher value could be the hereafter. It could be the pleasure of Allah. It could be benefiting humanity or society. And so it's this understanding that Islam infuses meaning and direction to productivity that actually sets it apart from any other, in some ways, any other worldview, right? Because it frames that productivity. Now, some people will make the argument, well, if Islam is just telling you to be productive, but it really just emphasizes the akhirah and beats down on the dunya, doesn't that mean that we just have to work hard for the akhirah and that basically we'll just neglect everything in the world? And this is some people, not Orientalists, but intellectuals have actually blamed, Asharite thinking, not least of which was Imam Ghazali, for the decline of the Muslim Ummah, right? So that you had this burgeoning of Islamic sciences and this Islamic Renaissance, and there was a time in the Islamic world where Europe couldn't hold a candle to what was going on in the Arab world. I mean, every single field of and why did that happen? There was many contingencies and circumstances that conspired to bring together that reality, and there was also similar many different circumstances and contingencies that conspired to that decline. But it is not, as people say, that it was due to an overemphasis on just a hereafter and a neglect of things of the world. And I'll tell you very simply why that theory doesn't hold up. And it ties into this whole idea of productivity, is because many people sometimes make this false dichotomy between, doing well in dunya and doing well in akhirah, when in fact, excellence is a switch. It's either on or it's off. When a person is in excellence mode, right? When you're in that, like when you play these video games and sometimes you get these power-ups. I mean, once you have the power-up, it's not gonna, discriminate whether or not you're jumping over a mushroom or running through a wall or that there's some type of, knife trap. It's just gonna let you run through all of those with impunity because you're in power-up mode. So similarly, when someone turns on this attitude of excellence, they're just excellent. You're just going to be excellent at everything that you do. And that's why, hard work begets hard work and laziness begets laziness. A nice anecdote about this is, what's that called? I remember calling one of my teachers one time, and we're having a conversation, and this is a man who literally runs at like the speed of light. I can't keep up with him, and his teacher is even more intense than him. And when he came back for, I think, a trip, I forgot, to some country with him, I said, "Wow, that must have been so amazing." And he's like, "No, I'm just happy to be back." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, I just couldn't keep up with him." And I've actually met him, right? He was the type of person who would sleep like 1 hour a night and just tirelessly do work of deen. So anyway, so I asked him, I called him and we were just talking, and he was talking about how he had a little bit of a reprieve. in terms of his time. And I was like, wow, this is great. So I was like, it's much deserved. And he said, no, Milana, I don't like it. I'm like, why is that? And he said, because laziness breeds laziness. And it's the same idea that, when you turn yourself on in your deen, you're gonna be on your A game when it comes to your dunya, and vice versa as well. Which is why one of my teachers, they had advised me, I happened to train at WashU, which at that time was like the fifth best med school in the world. And it might sound elitist, but one of my teachers said that, you really need to do work on the students at WashU, and, spend time with them and work with them. And I was like, and like I said, it seemed not so egalitarian, because I was like, why should I give preference to WashU over SLU? Like what was wrong with them? But what he said next really stuck with me. He said, no, when people are, in this turn on mode, and when they excel, they bring those same attributes to the deen. And this comes in narration. الناس معادن خيرهم في الجاهلية خيرهم في الإسلام إذا فقهوا أو كما قال, that the people are different metals, that people have different inner metals. And if you find that one golden child, and they excel in everything, they're going to bring that excellence into Islam. So this is why, when we talk about, Islam extolling the idea of being productive, even if it is for uh, altruistic things of altruistic nature, for the hereafter, for helping humanity, and all of these things, the unintended or perhaps intended consequence, the shoulder effect of that, is that it will show up in your dunya as well, right? And the Prophet ﷺ, in one narration, he said, "Inna Allah kataba al-ihsana ala kulli shay." That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written ihsan on every single thing. فَإِذَا قَتَلْتُمْ فَأَحْسِنُوا فِي الْقِتْلَةِ, that when you kill, then be beautiful in the killing. وَإِذَا ذَبَحْتُمْ فَأَحْسِنُوا الذِّبْحَةِ, and when you slaughter, then be excellent in the way you slaughter, meaning that you should sharpen the knife and not left وَلْيَرِحْ ذَبِيحَتَهُ, and don't let the animal feel discomfort. Yarih is actually to show raha, to give comfort to someone else, meaning be so good at it that you take perhaps the ultimate example of something which would be perhaps grotesque, which is the taking of a life. And the Prophet ﷺ said that even in that extreme circumstance, right, in that extreme event along the Gaussian distribution of life, all right, seek excellence even in that, right? Try to infuse beauty even in that, right? And the hadith is in Muslim. Now, so hopefully by now, I wanted to impress on the audience, right? Two things. Number one, we do have this idea of productivity in Islam, and that idea of productivity is nestled in the context of meaning. So Islam doesn't just tell us to be productive for its own self, but it gives us direction to that productivity. And the second idea is that once you become productive in your deen, that productivity is going to spill over into your dunya as well. Now, in a more practical sense, if a person wants to say, well, how does Islam make me productive? And particularly, how does the Sunnah make me productive? Then I think we have to understand one very large concept or broad concept, and that's the concept of attainment. If a person wants to attain success, it's usually done by two means. One means are the means of what we call sunnatullah, or what we call material means, the ways of the world. And the way of the world is that things are attained by effort, meaning that you strive and you go through the trials and tribulations, and the more effort that you put, the more that you should achieve, right? You work for 1 hour, you get $10. You work for 2 hours, you get $20. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. And this is in the world of the exoteric and the material. And then there's a supernatural divine dimension to attainment, and that is through the road of Baraka. So one road is through the road of effort, and the other is through the road of Baraka. And these two things are not mutually exclusive. But oftentimes, one of the failings of the modern world is it completely ignores the possibility of a supernatural realm. It ignores, and in fact, frankly, denies the idea of the extraordinary. When in fact, throughout history, there has been too much evidence for us to look the other way. Right? How do you explain an individual who has neither father nor mother, who is in the middle of a desert with no formal education and frankly no means, who comes up with an idea and in the course of 23 years changes uh, lays the basis for a major world religion, changes the entire course of humanity, and leaves such a legacy that even to this day, his name cannot be taken except that people say Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Right? I mean, that there is something that is not completely explainable by logic, reason, or rationality there. There's some element of the divine must be at work, because that kind of stuff doesn't happen. How do you explain a person the like of Mullah Ashraf Ali Thanwi? This is a time where there was no faxes, that there was no internet, there was no computers, and he pens no less than some 1,500 books. And each book isn't like, a little pamphlet. The, there's books like a tafsir of the entire Quran or translations of the entire Quran, and works which were so complex that, I mean, if you just figure it out, it turns out to be something like a book a week, and you couldn't even read maybe a fourth of the book, right, in the week. So what was going on in their lives that's not happening in our lives, and it's really the Baraka factor. And that's something so how do you increase productivity through the Sunnah? Well, the thing that happens is when a person follows the Sunnah, it brings Baraka into their life, and Baraka works by a multiplier effect. It's no longer one-to-one. And I'll give you one example about this. You know, I told you I was training at WashU, and this was the type of places where, I mean, around the corner was like a Nobel laureate, and it was a very toxic, very intense environment. Everyone's a gunner. Everyone is like, I mean, there's all these brilliant people, like people who I trained with. Some people have started their own fields in pathology, and some other person is an endowed professor at Columbia. And, each one became so accomplished, subhanAllah. And, when I was training there, I had other things going on in my life, right? I mean, we have Tarawih, we go to Salah, I had children, and you want to give them time and you want to do proper tarbiyah of them. And so like, everyone there was 110% effort. And I was like, maybe, I mean, first it was like 1 foot out, 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Half my heart was like in the madrasa or the masjid. It wasn't at the hospital. And then, so maybe you put in like 50% effort. And I remember going to one of my shuyukh and asking him about this. I was like, and the thing that troubled me is that, when you're not running at that pace when everyone else is, it's not a good look, right? One of the reasons I go by Omar, I grew up by Omar, but one of the reasons at work I would go by Muhammad, I was like, when I inshallah try to show the akhlaq of the Prophet, then they'll associate that with the name Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then they'll associate that with Islam, and it'll be indirect dawah. Right? That used to be my intention. But the fact of the matter is, I wasn't being a very good da'i because everyone was beating my pants off because they're working harder than me, they're smarter than me, they're better than me in everything. So it wasn't necessarily a good look. Um, and so I remember complaining to my teacher about this one time, and he said, "Yeah, that's true." And he got it. He knew how those people work, right? And he said, "Yeah, they are very good, but you have one thing that they don't have. You have barakah." And I was like, "Okay, but I'm trying to do all the right things. It doesn't seem like barakah is getting me very far here at WashU." But the thing about Baraka is it's not like an on switch on a Nintendo Switch. Um, it takes time to unfold. And the very many places where Baraka has unfolded in my life, sometimes it takes decades, but it does come, right? I mean, I could say that throughout my whole training, There's been many challenges, but alhamdulillah, 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 due to work, I've never missed a prayer. Or due to the hospital or medicine, I've never missed a prayer in my life for that. And that brings in barakah because that's the sunnah. And I can tell you when I started at Moffitt, I remember looking at the CV of my chair, and she had, let's say, X number of publications. And I looked at that and I said, in my entire career, if I can try to get to where she's at, that would be a lifetime accomplishment. And so I've been here for like 10 years. And in that time, I've had cancer, I've been debilitated for 8 years, I had two more children, ran Makia, we founded Kufah. I mean, it's been a whirlwind in the background. But I'm a couple of publications away from X now, right? And you look back and it boggles my mind. And I can just harken back to what my teacher had said so long ago. Like, you do right, you live by the sunnah, and Baraka comes in. It's the multiplier, right? So part of this, now we're going to go through some particulars from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, that if we bring those things, how they can increase productivity, right? The first one of those is increased productivity and the multiplier there being the Baraka factor. So the first one is energy, right? If you want to be productive, it takes a tremendous amount of energy. And this is something that, it's almost a plight of the time, that everyone's just tired, and they're tired all the time. If you look at the Prophet ﷺ, you could say he was tireless. I mean, even it was the amount of energy he had was even down to the way that he would walk. When the Sahaba described the way the Prophet ﷺ walked, they said he walked briskly, right? It's as if, like, for example, a person's foot is in the mud, and how you extricate your foot and lift it up with vigor, because it takes a little bit of energy to get your foot out. But he would just walk like that. And I remember trying to walk like that for a short period of time, and I just got tired. And that's just the way he used to walk. And when he used to walk normally, the Sahaba would have difficulty trying to keep up with him. Right? He had this inner strength. They were digging the trench before the Battle of Khandaq, and they came across a huge rock. And they came and like they could have just figured it out themselves, but they went to the Prophet ﷺ, right? So he wasn't just their spiritual mentor. They're like, we need some help. There's a really big rock here. And so the Prophet ﷺ didn't have he wasn't the tallest of the Sahaba, and he didn't have the widest shoulders of all the Sahaba. And it wasn't like, anyone, he wasn't of the greatest physical stature, but he said, Ana nazil. He said, I'm coming down. ثم قام وبطنه مأصوب بحجر. And he got down, and around his stomach, he had tied a rock because he hadn't eaten for 3 days. So he's down in the trench. He hasn't eaten for 3 days. He's older. He's more elderly now in his life, right? Because the Battle of the Trench was towards the end. And he just took out his mi'wal and he struck it. And it became kathayib. It became like sand. Ahwal, oh ahwal. And it's not just stories, because I can tell you, you guys are sitting here, you're listening to me, you all are fasting, and most people will probably tell you that, yeah, we're probably a little bit hungry, probably a little bit tired, but you're more energetic. And what this means, and the question is, where is this energy coming from, right? When we don't have energy the entire year to pray 2 rakat nafil, somehow something happens and we can stand up for 20 rakat. And the question is, where is that energy coming from? And that energy comes from a different sector. It's not coming from the body, it comes from the soul. When a person connects themselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them a deep type of energy, right? A spiritual energy, a nur that they walk with. And that dramatically affects outcomes when it comes to productivity. And so one thing is the input, and the other thing is that when you follow the sunnah, you also block the output, right? Because there's certain things in our life which are energy suckers, right? They're like black holes that people open up in their lives. The number one black hole that people open up in their life is sin, especially sins of the eyes, but just sin in general. that sucks energy out of a person's spiritual life, right? It's a spiritual black hole. And then a person can't partake in that spiritual energy. When people lie, right, that is a spiritual sucker. Why is that? It's a spiritual vacuum because what a tangled web we weave when we first practice to deceive. You got to follow all your lies, and that's pretty tiring, right? If you don't have to deal with drama, and you don't have to deal with politics, and you don't have to deal with anxiety of loss, or whether I'm going to get fired tomorrow, or what will happen, and you have tawakkul in your life, when there's just no worry, right? This drain that exists in most people's life that saps them of their energy, you block that. So you block the black hole, and then you infuse yourself with energy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then that's one way where a person can become extremely productive. I know one of my teachers, he said that, he would, when he was studying in the madrasa, and that's a magical land where all types of magical things happen, and people will tell you that he would just get up in the middle of the night, and his eyes would be like peeled open, and he couldn't shut them, and he would say that I would get done in one night what I can't get done in a month over here. Right? So the first aspect is energy, right? And that's something that we see in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. The second thing that we see is the importance of valuing time, right? In the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. If you look at the Prophet ﷺ in his life, he didn't waste any time. He left no stone unturned in pursuing his mission. And sometimes to the level that a person would look at it from the outside, and you would say that it's ludicrous for a person to spend that much of themselves, right? I mean, there's a knock on the door. The story goes at Abu Jahl's door, and it's raining outside, and he opens the door, and this is a person who's rejected the Prophet ﷺ. He's been an enemy of the Prophet ﷺ. He's left, nothing in trying to cause harm to the Prophet ﷺ. And it's raining, and he opens the door and he sees the Prophet ﷺ. And he says, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "Well, it's raining, and I thought that, the mood is like this, and maybe your heart was soft, maybe you would heed the call." And why did he push himself like that? Because, and there's example after example in his life, and we don't have the time to go into it, but the reason he pushed so hard was because he didn't want to leave any space for an excuse or a allegation to be put on him that there was a deficiency in the effort that you put, right? That a deficiency in the effort that you put, or the time that you wasted, that you dedicated not enough time to this mission that you were tasked with, meaning that he should be blameless. And that's why he took the shahada of the people on his farewell, what's it called, on his farewell pilgrimage, Hal Balaghta, and Allahumma shahad, right? And everyone said, yeah, أديت الأمانة وكشفت that you relayed the amana, so on and so forth. And so, فكيف إذا جئنا بك على هؤلاء شهيدا, that there will be a day that he will be brought and he'll be a witness over everyone else. And how can you be a witness unless you did your job 100%? And so he would never waste any time. And Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah, he said that الصيف أو الوقت صيف إن لم تقطع به تقطع, that time is a sword that if you don't cut with it, it will cut you. And what that really means is that we need to make sure that we make the best use of all our time, right? And that we don't waste any of it, and that we structure our time. So the idea is, I mean, if you look at the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, when would the day start? The day starts at the Tahajjud, right? Which is in the last 1/3 of the night. And then from Tahajjud, he would pray until the Fajr time came. And then after Fajr, he wouldn't go to sleep. And then he would be productive until he took the Khaylula. So basically, by the time that many people are just crawling out of bed, he had already gotten one workday out of that. And then after that, and you take a short power nap, and after that, you start working again, and then you can take the second day out of one day. So out of every one day, you end up getting 2 days, right? And that's one thing that he didn't do, was waste time chilling around, having qahwa coffee, shooting the breeze, watching movies. He wouldn't even talk after Isha, right? Naha Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is particularly a word about talking after the Isha Salah. And it just shows how particular he was about his time. And so when you're particular about your time, one part of it is, structuring it. And the life of the Prophet ﷺ was largely structured around the 5 daily prayers. He had a daily schedule, by and large, that he followed. But that's the quantitative aspect, but then there's a qualitative aspect. And the qualitative aspect is just cutting out all the distractors. Right. At one point in my life, I was like, okay, I'm going to get really serious about my life, and I'm going to get really serious about my deen. And I overcame all the inertia and actually made an Excel sheet about exactly how I was going to budget every single, hour of my life and every single hour of my day. And I sent it to my mentor, and I said, here, I made a schedule. And it was this like triumphant moment because I had overcome, it was a long struggle to even get to that point and that resolve. And he never even opened the Excel sheet. He just looked at me and he said, just cut out the distractions. And nature abhors a vacuum. And if a person, and the Prophet ﷺ said, Min husn al-Islam al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'ni, from the goodness of a person's Islam is to leave that which doesn't concern you. So if it doesn't concern you, just leave it. If the news doesn't concern you, just leave it. I mean, just recently we had this weekend retreat event, which was called From Distraction to Direction. And it was really about like social media and internet. And I don't know if other people benefited, but I mean, I know it benefited me because coming out of that is like, I just sort of avoid my phone or try to avoid my phone. I don't want to watch any of the news. I don't want to like check my email. I don't want to, avoiding infinite scroll. All of these type of things, it just gives you so much more time back into your life, right? It just returns focus. And I think one of the things that really people lack, and when they can provide structure, or they say I don't have time, it's not that they don't have time, it's just there's too many distractions. Sometimes people ask, like, how do you go and become an alim, do alim course and undergrad and all of these type of things and become a medical doctor and Shariah and Hafiz. But I can tell you, when I was an undergrad, I mean, I try to make use of every single moment. First of all, I wouldn't spend any more time on campus than I had to. It was in and out. It was like surgical. I didn't have any friends. I wouldn't hang out. I mean, there's like one time I can sort of remember where my old buddies from Madrasa finally convinced me to a sleepover and hang out. I just remember how guilty I felt because it's like I wasted one night. I didn't have friends. My friends were my teachers and my books. And there was a very rigid structure. Uh, and it was, I think, that the lack of distractors, right? The lack of distractors in life that allowed me to be so productive in those years. Okay, the next thing. So we talked about time. We talked about structure. We talked about excellence in the life of the Prophet. The fourth thing I want to mention is focus. And the Prophet ﷺ had a tremendous amount of focus, right? He had one mission, one heart, one love, and he gave it his all. And he was so connected and so focused. Can you imagine? I mean, his baseline was hyper focused, and then he went into even greater levels of focus when it came to his ibadah. Like when adhan would go, they would describe him that, when he was used to be with us, it was like he was sort of like with us, and then the adhan would go off, and it was like he would go off to he was like in a different realm. And one time, the adhan went off, and he was so immersed in that hal of having to stand before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He didn't even enter the prayer yet. He saw Aisha radiallahu anha, which was his beloved wife, and he says, Man anti? He says, who are you? And she said, Aisha. And he said, Man Aisha? Who's Aisha? Like he had no idea. He was mustarraq fillah. He was completely lost, fana in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so we have so many things from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that are built into our deen that develop focus. For example, the 5 daily prayers. But you can't just pray the prayers. You got to pray them with khushu. Yeah, it is every single prayer is like the training ground. It's the proving ground, right? It's the academy to try to develop focus, where try to get ourselves to pray 2 rakat without having any extraneous thought of anything from the dunya, right? I mean, that should just sort of be a goal. And we should keep on challenging ourselves every time we get into prayer. Reading the Quran takes a tremendous amount of focus, especially if you don't understand it. Making dhikr takes a tremendous amount of focus, right? One of the hardest, dhikrs is muraqabah. This is where you just have to sit down and you don't have it's quietly and just do nothing but just focus on the heart. And most people just, die on that hill and never really make it past that because it's just so hard to be able to focus. People are just not used to it anymore. And part of it is because of infinite scroll. It's just destroying people's attention. But, as a sort of a nice side story, I remember there was this one museum where, what's that called? They have this, it says it's like a science museum, and they had this setup where I think you wear something on your head and it tracks your brain waves, and you're supposed to focus on, and it translates your focus on the like some object, and the other person stands on the other side and they're supposed to focus on it, and whoever basically can send more brain waves or energy can basically like move the ball to the opposite sides, right? So they're battling against each other in terms of their focus. So there was this one of these mashayikh who had spent like hours, hundreds of hours probably in muraqabah, and he puts on the thing, and someone else put on the cap on the other side, and it's like go. It's like, and the ball was like zoop, like it went to this other side right away, because just having spent that much time in dhikr, the mind has already become trained. The other thing that we see from the life of the Prophet ﷺ was a tremendous amount of discipline. The Prophet ﷺ, he was very rigid in what he did, and he kept himself to that. So much so that one time there was a delegation that came, and because of that, he had to move, I think, 4 rak'ah of his salah to a different time. And it was important because it was a political situation, and he wasn't able to pray those 4 rak'ah. But when he moved it to the next time, then he kept it there and he never moved it from there, right? And this idea of discipline, I mean, we're living in the month of discipline, right? This is Ramadan. The whole idea in Ramadan is to bring our nafs under control. And to really be productive, what it means is that you have to force yourself to do things which are really uncomfortable. I think one very stark moment um, of focus in my own life, even though I had done hifz and had done all these other things, you could say I had pretty good focus, was I remember I was taking this one class in med school. I think it was neuroanatomy. And I wasn't like at the top. I was sort of like mid or something in the class. I wasn't doing as well as I'd liked. And I was like, okay, I just got to kick this in gear. So I still remember like, going to the library, and I don't usually study at the library, but I actually went to the library this time and pulling out like netter and just sitting down. And it was like, I kept on like going through the different like nerves and the pathways and the way they bend, and until I literally wanted to vomit. And I kept on going and I kept on going. And then I think I took the next exam, and it was like one of the top scores in the entire class. But it was this idea of just the discipline. And sometimes that discipline is not just for a couple of hours, right? It was a couple of months when it came to my boards. And again, the next time when I had to take my pathology boards, it was another expended time. And then at a certain level, it just becomes an attitude about life, that you just get yourself to be disciplined about the way you live life. And the beautiful thing about discipline is that if you can get there, it really frees you from your nafs. This is one of the huge paradoxes of Western society, is that they extol this life of, you can, if you live in America, it's a free country, you can do whatever you want. Well, you're not really free if you're a slave to your nafs. You're not really free if you're beholden to desire. The person who's truly free is the person who their nafs is slave to them, right? They're the master of their soul. They're the master of their self. That they can do what they actually want. Meaning, if they want to eat, they can eat. And if they want to stop eating when they're still hungry, they can actually do that, right? That's really, that's actually what I would call freedom. And when a person becomes free in that way and disciplined in that way, can really become productive. And the last thing I'll mention is from the life of the Prophet. There's more points as well, but is the simplicity of the Prophet. I mean, he hardly had any belongings. You follow him through the arc of his prophethood, all 23 years. Where's the upgrade? Where's the upgrade? From going from an orphan to becoming the king of Arabia. And where's the upgrade? I mean, he lives in such austere means that, Umar radiallahu anhu would walk into the house and he would cry, seeing at what difficult, living situations, in conditions that he was going through. He ate less, he spoke less, he had few belongings. If he had something extra, he would just give it away. And this really underscores a minimalist lifestyle. And other people have keyed into this, right? Like Warren Buffett, he lives in the same home that he's lived in. Zuckerberg has a closet of all the same types of t-shirts. Elon Musk, he sold almost all his houses and bought a tiny house in Texas so he can focus on other things like building rockets, electric cars, and robots, right? So this idea of simplicity, right, actually really facilitates productivity. So now I'm just going to sort of bring it in. I mean, we talked about a whole bunch of things, and it's probably too much to, sort of corral, right? We talked about so many different things. I just wanted to sort of bring it home to something very practical, right? We're talking about Islam. How does it pertain to your life? How does it increase productivity? I'm going to give you a couple of very simple things, and I think very portentous things that people can do on a regular basis, that should make some type of impact. Number one, pray the five, right? But just don't pray them. Try to pray them with focus. So challenge yourself that I want to get through my 5 daily prayers without having any extraneous thoughts. Just that, and don't do that with the intention of, oh, I want to do this because I want to get into med school, right? That's not the intent. Or I want to get into ortho. We should just pray for the sake of Allah. We should have focus for the sake of Allah. But if you can do that, you're going to see spillover in other aspects of your life. The second thing I would say is try to pray the tahajjud salah, right? Which means try to get up in the middle of the night, even if it's 2 rakah, and start your day from then, and don't go to sleep after Fajr prayer. So by doing that, you're basically squeezing 2 days out of every 1 day, right? And start your day with prayer. Start your day with connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because then, it's that reset. It gives meaning. It gives direction to all this productivity that we're talking about, right? Because then it makes you remember that, all the stuff that we're working so hard for, does it really matter? And it puts everything in context. The third thing I would say is try to incorporate some level of fasting on a regular basis outside of Ramadan, right? Whether it's 3 days a month, whether it's Mondays and Thursdays, whatever it is, but at some level, try to incorporate some nafil fasting. And the third thing, or the fourth thing, is to try to cut out distractions as much as possible. And distractions may be TV, they may be friends, they may be movies, it may be music, it may be anything that's getting in the way of focus and attention and discipline. Just cut it out. And the best way to cut something out is cold turkey, right? Don't make all these, oh, well, I'm going to do this, inshallah, in the summer. I'm going to do this when I get to third year. I'm going to do this when I get married. I'm going to do this, inshallah, when I have kids, because we all know how that goes, right? We've been making those same resolutions for years and nothing really changes. And the last thing, I'm going to close with this, is submit to the Sunnah. The whole thing, the talk, we started off by saying that the way that we get ahead in terms of productivity, one way is through effort, but it's just 1-to-1, but the multiplier is Baraka. And so where does Baraka come from? Baraka comes from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And so looking to the Prophet ﷺ and trying to bring as many different aspects of his life into our own lives, the way he walked, the way he talked, the way he dealt with youngers, the way that he looked at life, the way he felt, the clothes that any aspect of the Prophet ﷺ, right? External, internal. The more we will bring that into our life, the more barakah we have, and the more barakah we have, the more productive we can be. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. So Jazakallah khair for sharing your evening time. I'm sure we just have a couple of minutes for before iftari, and this is actually a very accepted time, the dua al-muftari mustajab, that the dua of the person who breaks their fast is actually accepted. So we'll give everyone, inshallah, a couple minutes to make dua, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair.
Jazakallah khairan, Shaykh Umar. Thank you so much. Truly such an enriching, heartwarming, and relatable session. It was filled with lots of memorable stories and precious gems that we'll surely carry along with us in our journeys in life. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to place immense barakah in your time. Shaykh Umar, we're always so grateful for your unwavering support and guidance. And to everyone listening, Jazakallah khairan for tuning in. May Allah reward each and every one of you and all of those who intended to join but couldn't, for choosing to spend this special time seeking closeness to Him. Inshallah, look out in the WhatsApp chat for details about next week's session with Shaykh Dr Ali Ismail. We'll share more information about that closer to the date. If you're not already in the chat, you can join in the QR code at the top of the screen, top right. And to learn more about Kufah and their incredible work, including recorded podcasts and blogs by Shaykh Umar and other scholars, you can scan the QR code on the bottom right. May Allah bring you guys a beautiful night, nourishing iftar, and strengthen your tarawih. Please keep us in your special du'as. And if you're in Florida, and we've got just a couple more minutes for iftar, so if you could, Shaykh Umar, would you honor us with a closing du'a, please?
Sure. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, kama yanbaghi li jalali wajhika al-kareem wa sultanika al-azim. Allahumma laka al-shukru kullu wa laka al-hamdu kullu. اللهم لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم اجعلنا من أبناء الآخرة ولا تجعلنا من أبناء الدنيا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم لا تجعل الدنيا مبلغ همنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Ya Allah, we are ever so grateful to you for your immense and unending benefits and blessings and gifts that you have bestowed upon us and our families. Ya Allah, we cannot thank you enough. And amongst those gifts, you have given us the very precious gift of Ramadan. Ya Allah, you have entered us into this month. Ya Allah, let us not leave this month except that we have been purified. And let us not leave this month except that we have been exalted spiritually. And let us not leave this month unless that you have brought a change into ourselves, into every atom of our existence, until that we become connected to you and in love with you and devoted to you and submitted to you entirely and wholly, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Ya Allah, make it a change that is transformative. Make it a change that is lasting. Ya Allah, allow us to have discipline in our life. Ya Allah, make us amongst those who value their time. Ya Allah, give us focus in our life and make that focus in our qibla, you and you alone. Ya Allah, allow us and give us the tawfiq to cut out all the distractions and all the other false idols that are in our life that are keeping us and serving as obstacles and challenges from us getting close to you, Ya Allah. Ya Allah, we are too weak to crawl even to your door. We ask you that you grab us by our forelock and drag us into your mercy, just the way that you dragged us into Ramadan, that you drag us into your forgiveness, the way that you drag us into the masjid, that you drag us into your acceptance, Ya Allah, the way that you dragged us into this deen. Ya Allah, we are wholly and utterly helpless, and we beseech you, Ya Allah, to the one who is completely capable over every single thing and who is irresistible and who is magnificent and majestic, that Ya Allah, that you give us wilayah in this month, that you give us the highest levels of wilayah, Ya Allah, that you grant us taqwa, Ya Rabbil Alameen, that you allow us to, in this month, live a life without any type of sin, and for the rest of our life to live a sinless life as well. And you remove all blemishes from our heart and polish it, and so it becomes a shining light, Ya Rabbil Alameen. And lastly, Ya Allah, we ask you for the greatest gift of the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in our life. Ya Allah, make our walking like him, our talking like him, our thinking like him, our actions like him, our emotions like him, our ahwal like him, Ya Rabbal Alameen. Ya Allah, inculcate as much of the Sunnah in our life as possible. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun wa mursalin walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.